That would be okay. So yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Bonnie Gordon, one of the other two one of the other two regular facilitators that joined me is not here today, but Ellen is. Ellen is the co-facilitator of these bi-weekly Zoom sessions. Ellen, you want to do a quick introduction?
Okay,
I think everyone knows you.
it's me. I work in the Office for Academic Outreach, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. Nice to see you.
Good to see everyone. And also today we're joined by a special guest facilitator, Rose Cole. Rose has generously offered to do a session for us on virtual volunteering, which is something that she's been thinking a lot about, and I know that all of us are or will be soon. And Rose, we'll introduce you in just a second, okay? I think everyone probably knows you, but we'll do an introduction. I just want to say a couple of quick things. So this will be the second to last session of this learning community, which was created really in the midst of the crucible about a month and a half ago for this particular group of community engaged faculty who have a unique set of challenges with this transition to online. And so Rose is going to facilitate a conversation around virtual volunteering this week. And next week, Mira Waller from the library, who will be joining us a little bit later today, is going to help facilitate our wrap-up session on how community engaged faculty can humanize the online environment. And so that will be our concluding session for this learning community. And I'm thinking maybe we'll start something up again in the fall. But that will May 15th will be the last one for this particular community. One of the things that I really like about these learning communities, and that's really what this is, we call it a bi-weekly Zoom session, which is a very boring name for it. It's a learning community. And I love the word community because, you know, all of us in this room, or so to speak, have perspectives and expertise that will be helpful, that are helpful to the rest of us. And so that became clear to me after last session when I was talking to Mira and Rose. It was very clear that they had some really unique perspectives and expertise beyond what I could offer that would be helpful to all of us. And so I'm very grateful to you guys, to Rose and Mira for offering to do this. And I would also like to invite any of you, if there are topics that you would be excited to facilitate or co-facilitate a conversation around, please let me know. You know, follow up with an email, let me know, and we'll make it happen either this summer or this fall, maybe as a part of another learning community that I'd like to start up. But I really would love to draw on other people's expertise because in this space of community engaged teaching, there is a lot of expertise in the room. And so I want to take advantage of that. Before we get started, one quick question and one administrative thing. The administrative thing is, let's use chat to ask questions or to share a resource, but not to have behind the scenes conversations, only because for those of us who are visually impaired, that can be very distracting, okay? We will also collect the material from this session and put it into our ongoing Google Doc, which Ellen has been Ellen has been doing for us. So I'll send you a link to that as well. And then the question I have is, how many of you are teaching right now, wrapping up teaching a community engaged course this spring? Just kind of you can raise your real hand. I'm just curious. Esther, Malfin, Kate, oh, Shuchen, okay. Okay, how many of you are going to be teaching one in the fall? Okay. All right, I just wanted to get a sense of that. All right. Great. So with that intro, I'd love to turn it over to you, Rose, and I've made you a co-facilitator. And if you want to do a breakout room, you know, Ellen and I can monitor a couple of those. It's your call.
Yeah, I'm thinking this might be a decent enough group. We can a good size for kind of staying together is what I'm leaning towards. But hi everyone, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for making time on. Shockingly, it's May 1st. But I just to give you a little bit of background about me, I am Director of Community Engagement at Madison House. My dissertation research was on global citizenship education at institutions of higher education, but I've also published on college student activism, student engagement, and kind of citizenship education, how students think of, learn to think of themselves as members of a community and how they think about their rights and responsibilities in communities as, you know, a formative part of the college experience. So I got my PhD from Curry here. And before that, I worked at West Virginia University, where I taught service learning courses through their leadership and education programs, and did kind of some global service learning trips. And yeah, so, I'm not teaching this semester, but I sort of, at Madison House, I'm in it with the students, and we're thinking about virtual volunteering all the time. So I told Andy I thought maybe I could kind of share some of the frameworks and lenses that I'm using to evaluate, in the hopes that they might be helpful to you in your classes, and thinking about the new normal, and I'm wanting to be committed to this work. So I'm gonna guess that a lot of what I share is stuff that you all have already intuited your way into thinking about, and it's probably not going to be brand new, but what I'm hoping is that it's structured in a kind of helpful, bite-sized kind of takeaway action items for thinking about your syllabus type of way. So yeah, one of the things I would like to start with is if we could I would love to, I know we kind of have seen each other as the usual suspects on this, but when you introduce yourself, I would love for you to add a sentence or two about either like what's worrying you, like what's kind of running through your mind about doing community engagement like this, possibly in the future, or questions that are kind of forefront for you, or just sort of any insight you're going to take with you. So just kind of any sort of reflection on this new normal for community engagement from this semester, and how you're thinking. So I just kind of want to take a pulse really quickly. And I will say that for me, a question, I don't think I'm teaching next semester, but something for me in terms of virtual volunteering and students that is just kind of running through my head is this idea of, especially for our education programs, are our systems even going to be, you know, where the trauma they're undergoing, is it going to be totally useless what we do? You know, that's kind of, and I know that's kind of an existential question, but I'm really worried about the institutions we typically partner with being in kind of dire straits in terms of getting back to normal and equity issues. So that's something that's turning around in my head, and that's the forefront of my mind. Yeah, so I don't know if the, I have Catherine next on my grid, so maybe we can just kind of go around.
Hi there, I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Nursing, and this summer we'll be teaching the community health class, which typically we have, they're actually second degree graduate students who are learning to become an RN, but already have a degree in another field, bachelor's degree in another field. And I've been involved in this course for 5 or 6 years. And I guess sort of what's worrying me is the same thing that has always worried us, which is sort of how to find this balance between giving the students a meaningful experience in the community, while at the same time, in a way that contributes to the community, while at the same time not leeching resources from the community. Like, it's this fine balance all the time. And I'll just add that one of the things that I think that is interesting about this group is that many of you are working in the same communities that we've been working in. And yet I had not fully been aware of that before now, which means that these communities are being taxed in multiple ways from multiple groups across the university already.
Thank you. If people just want to kind of jump in and introduce themselves, I feel like that's totally fine.
Hello. Hello, this is Shu Chen. I have been teaching community engagement courses for 3 semesters now. I would say interaction with the local Chinese community was extremely helpful for my students because they finally could go beyond the textbooks and then stop complaining about what's not in the book and I shouldn't talk about it or whatever. And their listening has improved a lot. And they have learned a lot of vocabulary they would never have learned from the textbooks. And they get to know the real people as well and realize what they learn in the classroom is really different from what actually is used in terms of Chinese language. I would say the challenge for me in the future is if we stay virtual, I would have to teach my friends how to use meeting softwares or apps. So that would be my biggest challenge because it wouldn't be the same without them in the classroom. Although I have done without after spring break, but still, I would like to incorporate them into the classroom again. And this summer we are doing Chinese Summer Language Institute virtually as well. So it's going to be challenging as well. I would like to bring them to talk to my students in the summer, but we'll see how it works. All right, that's all. Thank you.
I'm Naomi Worth. I'm a PhD candidate in religious studies, and I'm currently teaching a course, a 3000 level undergraduate course where we don't have a community outreach or partnership program, but I'm just thinking, I use a lot of contemplative pedagogy, and my field of research is Buddhist studies and yoga studies. So a lot of the students kind of demand that we do contemplative activities in those courses. It is an expectation at this point. And so I thought that adding community partners to some of my courses in the future, especially with some of the things that I'm doing with the Contemplative Sciences Center, where we're providing education for students not at UVA who don't have access to such programming, it would be a good thing to integrate into my future classes.
I'm Miao Fen Zhang, professor of Chinese and the director of Eastern World Language. I'm here to, again, learn from all of you in different disciplines. I'm grateful for Rose's leading discussion today, and there was a breakout Zoom led by Ellen and Andrew was very helpful in different aspects, including IWO's May 1st faculty retreat. That could have happened today. Today's May 1st, and you remember we invited you to, give us some guidelines and to function as a facilitator for today's IW faculty retreat, but it got canceled. Anyway, well, I don't need to teach this far because I received NEH, a Distinguished Teaching Professorship that is 3 year long from this coming semester to 2023. So I have course reduction, but I know I'm here to learn and to get some new inspiration. Well, to respond to what Rose mentioned, I actually don't have anything that worry me. I have nothing to worry about how to move forward to make our community engagement component go well and smoothly. One question I'm thinking about, again, for the course I teach in spring next year, not this coming fall, is which community is going to be my target community? Either continue to work with freshmen, students from China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Vietnamese Chinese, or to do something that I did before. The Institute of World Language got a grant from Jefferson Trust. We launched Language for Initiative. Shuzhen is part of it. She did a great job to invite native speakers in China to participate our community engagement on a bi-weekly basis. Yeah, so that's something that I'm thinking about. I haven't made a decision yet. I'm going to have a virtual meeting with faculty members in Beijing. They are faculty members in Beijing Normal University. This is something I'm thinking about. Yeah. So I wouldn't say it's challenge or something that I'm worried about. Yeah, but I'm very excited about it. Yeah.
I'll go next. I'm teaching a course in the fall on police community relations. In the past, what I've utilized is a lot of engagement opportunities, interactions, including police ride-alongs, but also some immersion, limited immersion excursions within communities. And with the possible lack of face-to-face interactions, of course, that will create some challenges, because those assignments, those experiences have had a tremendous impact on students being able to appreciate the different lived experiences. So coupled with that, one of the concerns I have too is especially the community populations that I interact with and engage with. There's some issues that are rising related to digital literacy and the digital divide, and trying to kind of think of ways on how we could kind of mitigate those issues, those problems with digital literacy and digital divide.
Thanks.
I could go next. I teach in the Spanish department, and we collaborate. My students do work with Latinx and Migrant Aid through Madison House. So those are education projects, but also with the UVA Latino Health Initiative. So they're more public health projects. And I've been thinking a lot about what it's going to look like in the fall if we go online. And one thing that I keep thinking about is that it might be a good opportunity for us to collaborate with community agents in things that regularly we don't have time to do because we're on the spot and we're actually working. The students go and do what they're, follow the instructions of what needs to be done on site, but there is always a need for materials or methodologies to be developed that then are used, like in a teaching environment. The students don't know how to teach, right? They don't know how to tutor. So it could be a great possibility for the students to work with the community agents, for example, to develop lesson plans or to develop materials. So maybe if the fall is a moment that is not person to person, there is still a need for some structures to be developed, maybe working with the community agents, and that could be a possibility for virtual volunteering. And in terms of kids that are bilingual, my course is a Spanish course, right? So they teach them English. But I think it would be a great opportunity to develop materials also in Spanish and to work also, to do both, or at least to set a foundation for not forgetting Spanish as a language of instruction, as a public language, and not be relegated only to the family sphere. So I don't know, I'm just thinking about what the possibilities, trying to take it as an opportunity to do something that we usually don't do because we're on the spot and we're rushed and we're just reacting rather than reflecting. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you. I think Kate and Indu and maybe someone new who just joined, or the last few folks.
So I can go next. I'm Kate. I'm in the English department, and I have been teaching community engagement classes for 3 years now. They, both my sections are for first years, and they focus on food justice. So my students, we do a lot of reading, obviously, and writing in the classroom, but deals a lot with theory of community engagement, race, food justice. But the really, I think, different or meaningful part for the students is actually working in the community at the Haven and Loaves and Fishes and the PVCC community garden. So I'm trying to figure out how we can do any of those virtually. I think over the past, I guess last semester, we really we're starting to move forward with a pretty interesting project at the Haven. We started a writers group there. And so we were writing with Haven guests and moving towards doing an online publication and maybe even a public reading of poetry and different kinds of writing and art that the guests had produced there. So I guess I'm hoping that maybe there's a way to continue that, at least production side of it, in the fall. I don't know how I'm going to offer any kind of, meaningful connections with the other two partners yet. Honestly, I found this last 6 weeks, just the transition was in a lot of ways easier than I thought, and the students are so resilient. I just admire them for the ways they finished the semester, but at the same time, it's been really disappointing to give up a lot of that community interaction. So I think I haven't really started looking forward as much as some of you have, but I realize I need to now, because it looks like we are, even if we are somehow in person, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to ask our students to go into some of these sort of more high-risk populations as well. So I guess I'm just here listening to what you guys have been thinking and hoping I'll leave here with a more concrete idea of what I can do.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll go next. So I'm Indu Ori, and I was teaching a 4,000 level English seminar this semester, which focused on 19th century social reform and applying that to modern community engagement. And my students were actually volunteering at Madison House, and I was working with Rose. And when, after spring break, they suddenly couldn't go anymore. So, instead, I asked them to come up with their own forms of virtual volunteering. And at first I wasn't quite sure it would work, but they all managed to complete like 10 hours at least of service, which is 100 hours total. So they were incredibly game for doing this and just very creative in the projects they came up with. But one thing I'm thinking of, especially if the volunteering continues to be virtual in the future, is my students kept saying over and over, like, yeah, we feel great doing these virtual projects, but we really miss the in-person ones. So how to make them feel as though virtual volunteering is still meaningful, because they don't have that sense of, like Kate was saying, that in-person interaction with other people. They don't always see the effect immediately that they're having, or that they're positively influencing the community they're working with. So my question is really around how can we make students feel that any form of volunteering they're doing is meaningful and worthy to the community and themselves?
Thank you. And I don't know if Rika, I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly, if we're sharing just kind of what we do, a quick introduction and a question we have about the upcoming semester or from this past semester.
Rika may just want to listen.
Yeah. Okay, this is really helpful. I think that thank you for indulging me in the longer introductions, but I think it's helpful to see some of the patterns that emerge and the idea of the questions that arise around virtual volunteering, that arise around ethical community engagement no matter what we do, the kind of ethics of burdening communities, and even the technological questions that I think are specific to virtual volunteering are also questions of ethics and equity. I think it's about access. And so, part of what I'm hoping to do in this conversation is illuminate the ways in which, virtual volunteering is not totally new, and it's also not totally fair to characterize it as like a completely separate thing from what everyone has been doing in community engaged courses. So I'm going to kind of launch into a quick spiel, and then Andy shared with me ahead of time his course objectives and his, like, the kind of outline of his course. And what I thought that I could do is use that as a jumping off point to share some of the questions that I would ask if I was teaching this class and trying to kind of make it be virtual. So yeah. So just to start giving you a little bit, just to start with virtual volunteering, one of the things, and I will share this Google Doc in case y'all want to kind of follow along. I'll put that in the chat. And I know we can make this available to everyone, but what we know about virtual volunteering that has existed, you know, for years, since the internet basically, is that typically it's highly skilled volunteers who want to work at their own pace and want to work independently and plug in. One of the most famous ones is the UN, or not famous, but one of the ones that has been around for the longest and is the most active is the UN. You can be a virtual volunteer for the UN, and you connect with NGOs and nonprofits who need things like grant writing help, website design, all of that kind of thing. So you can see that that's very highly skilled, and it's much more independent. It's not like often undertaken as a sort of project that a group does together and kind of comes together to talk about. So if you think about that and think about, I've been thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of like what it takes to even know in an organization that you need that highly skilled work. Many people in this disaster context, many organizations, you know, might be very far away from being able to support virtual volunteering, because that requires knowing that you need an updated website and having the content created for the updated website and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That for me is a really useful example. So when you think about that, you know, and the other thing is that we love our students. They're resilient and amazing, but a typical undergraduate isn't necessarily the kind of highly skilled volunteer always that has typically been filled when organizations have virtual volunteering needs. And all that, you know, that is not to denigrate undergraduates, but, you know, so that kind of informs the question of when you're transitioning to a virtual volunteering format with specific community partners, you know, will this disrupt their operations? Will this be a burden to them? I think those are two really important questions to ask. And then using those questions to serve as a lens through which to kind of view the work of the course and the work of community engagement. I will say, just to preface this nitty-gritty stuff, is that I think that it's fair to ask a couple of questions of yourself, which is, one, you know, it might be that you have a setup that translates to virtual volunteering like that. If you're talking about language tutors or, you know, conversational partners that then could, you know, you can deal with some access to technology issues, you can do some quick trainings, and then boom, that's great. And there's no need to feel, you know, I think that that's great. That might be a question that you should, you know, do I fit into that category? And that's a super easy pivot. And then the other thing I think it's totally fair to ask is, you know, does it fit for me to even do community engagement virtually? Like, I feel like I just want to put that out there that like, this is not, you know, much in the same way that I think Miro, and you've probably heard from many things, that like, this is not actually, this is sort of like remote learning because we can't be around each other. This isn't like a super well facilitated, distant, you know, actual like online teaching, because there are people who have been doing that and studying that and have best practices for that for years. And that's not where we're in. It's similar, the community engagement piece. So all that is to say, I think of this as a lens that you put on when you're trying to figure out the best next steps forward. And I'm hoping that the lens implies that there's not a way to like get it totally right or get it totally wrong, or like it's not black and white. It's more about committing to a process with the underlying values that you want to kind of embody in your class and what you want to model for your class. So I think of the lens as consisting of knowing, kind of doing the calculus of risk, reward, burden, outcome, you know, for the community partner, and being really aware and honest about that. And recognizing that in some cases, like there's not a perfect answer to that. Every volunteer, I mean, sometimes when I'm talking to students, I talk to them about the fact that like, volunteers are always sort of a burden. You have to figure out what to do with them. Anyone who's had an intern or like a graduate assistant knows, like, you have to figure out what to do. So there's always a level of accommodation. There's not a perfect world in which it's never a burden. So it's not that anything that they give that's, you know, sort of work for the community partner means that it doesn't make sense to be connected and try to do the work. But the burdens of virtual stuff might be different. And especially, I mean, Kate, I think there's probably from previous of, you know, Zoom meetings from this, I know it's, you know that your community partners are like making sure people get enough to eat right now, and have been really committed to, and I think that that has been an exemplar for how people should think about that hierarchy of needs and like what a burden is. I think the beauty of thinking about this now is that when this is a season out, that calculus changes, because it can be much smaller bites, and and there's probably organizations who are going to want to have moving up that hierarchy, even if they're still, you know, so it's not, I think that is an important thing to think of too. So another question to ask yourself with this calculus of the burden, like that kind of burden equation, is something that I think there's an opportunity for, that when we're all in person, you know, UVA especially, we want to be very careful about not just assuming things. But I think that with this virtual volunteering, you can do the calculus of, are there just some resources we could just create or offer to community partners that leverage the very privileged position we have of being a UVA class? And so while in a typical semester, you wouldn't necessarily just assume that a youth serving organization might want a literature review of the most recent best practices, in this time, that might actually be great. That might actually be creating something that could be really useful to them. So, you know, the key with that is framing it in a way that students know this is something we're creating for a community partner. But I think that this idea of like creating resources is an important lens to have on, is an important part of this lens, that this is the time. This is similar to what Esther was saying, kind of this idea of like, now is the time to do things. So when I know on our end, when we're talking about our education programs that are now kind of being virtual, being stopped like by virtual volunteers, we're creating a team of, you know, students who are fluent in Spanish, who are just translating all of our documents in a way that we could never get done in the middle of a semester. And, you know, that's its own thing. So kind of being creative with that and jumping into these things that are more time intensive, and also that you wouldn't necessarily do without a community partner asking for in normal times. So I think about that as research consolidation, kind of like lit review stuff, you know, like there's also a need, you know, every one of the community organizations that Madison House partners with, at least, is sort of situated in a local and regional and national context around the problems they're trying to solve. So having students think about those problems and try to make connections that then could be translated to something useful for a community partner. That's just kind of one thing to think about. And then I also think that the creativity and like having a commitment to like being expansive in how you define what community engagement is for your class is really key. So that might be, in this context, typically I would never say we should define UVA as its own community. UVA gets plenty of resources, you know, we don't need to, but when you're talking about, for some classes, for some students, having an orientation towards what could you do for your fellow students, for your peers and colleagues? What could we do for the people who are going to come after us? What could we do to capture things about what has come before us in this class? You know, having community be slightly different and a little more meta and inward than you typically would might be one way to pivot to virtual volunteering. It's not going to make sense for every situation, but for the tricky classes where it's just not going to work, and I think about Andy's class as an example, it's just not going to work. If you can't get in to see people who are incarcerated, you're not going to, you know, it's just not going to be the typical way. Also defining, defining engagement, again, that kind of, I think this gets at what Indu brought up, which is that it might be that this sort of in-person relationships that really define what, you know, the best parts of what students get out of a semester that's like community engaged. It might be that those are not gonna, that there's no way to recreate them, right? That like when we're being socially distant, it's just not gonna happen. And so redefining what that engagement looks like. And what's key about all of this is telling students about it and walking students through what your thought process is and giving them space to talk about what they miss, not being worried about that kind of vulnerability. I think students knowing the process is really key. And that is actually grounded in what we know from international service learning, because when you actually are traveling and it's kind of faculty led, there's a lot of research about how to do that ethically and how to not have it be kind of, you know, tourism and not have it be super extractive, but it never goes right. And like one of the things I know about best practices is like you need to talk through the process and be like, I can't. And that leads me to like the last part of this lens, which is really committing to the process and letting go of the outcomes and helping students kind of let go of the outcomes. If you are teaching a community, if we're teaching community engaged courses, you know, we are necessarily prioritizing student learning, right? They're in a class first. And so that means that maybe just not doing harm is the baseline. And if you don't do harm and you get through the class and you've committed to the process, that's okay. Obviously, you can't say, oh, commit to the process and not the outcome if you are actually on a team of researchers trying to solve public policy issues, right? But that's not what that's not what a class context is. So I think helping students recognize that, you know, we have the goal of, you know, let's say it was creating some resource, and we have the goal of this resource being useful to, you know, these 4 agencies that we typically would work with. And we hope that we're going to have it up and they're going to use it, and maybe it'll be downloaded X number of times or something. That like that X number of times, like there's got to be some room for that to not be what they hoped. And that doesn't mean the community engagement project has failed, right? Like the process of getting there needs to be defined as part of the success for students. And that is really hard for students. I mean, and this is also about service learning just in general. Like you can't, and you all have probably dealt with this because you have a lot of experience, the whole like, how do you grade me, right? Like, can you get an A on your volunteer hours? Like all of that kind of stuff. That's just like a deeper, like this is just a deeper level of that, just kind of another layer peeled back of like, it is not necessarily going to be a shiny A+ that the whole group can give itself, and that actually not doing harm and meeting course objectives that are focused on the students learning, that is the shiny A+. And one of the things that this reminds me of is in my research and in a lot of research, what we know is that critical community engagement, if students don't have that scaffolding to lead them to like, that's okay, we're still doing good, like this is still good, this is still okay, that they will sit in like the pit of despair. Like if we sort of like blow their mind about how systems are broken and ask them to think about community engagement in a really critical way, and they kind of feel like nothing they do is going to like have any meaning, they are worse off than if they hadn't taken a community engagement course. So worse off in terms of how they think about their rights and responsibilities in a community, how likely they are to kind of serve ethically in the future. So to me, this sort of being really explicit and meta about the process with them, about like, this is what we're committing to, this is what we're trying, like to give them a little bit of space to still sort of, I mean, celebrate seems like too hard of a word, but I think that they are going to be traumatized, and it is sort of something to celebrate when we're kind of, you know, reacting to this. So, yeah, and I also included some links to both the notes from previous meetings and this response guide that Ellen and Bonnie and I created that I think get into some concrete things. So I wanted to leave you with some thoughts on kind of actual, you know, once you have the lens on, what are some actual steps that could be options? So one is making sure that you know what's already happening with virtual volunteering, and avoiding needs assessments unless it's a very particular type of relationship, like a long-standing relationship with a lot of trust built up. In the context of COVID-19 pivots to virtual volunteering, needs assessments are not going to serve you super well. And there's lots of community organizations already doing them. So just trying to plug into like where people are gathering needs already, and seeing if there are ways that your students could just slide into things that are already happening, not starting brand new things. The other thing is giving some space to align things to be a little bit more as they typically are with virtual volunteering. So giving some space for independent. I think that Indu has talked a little bit. I think at the last thing in a breakout session, I heard her say, and she introduced it today, that like them coming up with their own pitches, and you say, listen, the goal of this class is I really want you to deeply understand X, Y, Z. I'm imagining you might be able to do that in these ways, but I need, you know, pitch what you would do to get there. We want it to be, you know, with a, and there's language about how you could do that in that response guide. I think there's a link to another document. And I also will say, I'm just going to end this spiel with, if you want to reach out to me, we got a Big Jefferson Trust grant and a Parents Fund grant to support more community engaged learning, so that faculty who wanted to plug into existing community partners through Madison House could use us for service placements. And we're still trying to do that. We're still going to try to do that next year. And what that is giving a faculty member basically an undergraduate TA and helping facilitate some of the connections. So that's just, you know, if you want to be on that journey with us, reach out and we're happy to think about it. So yeah, so that's the thing. And then I wanted to kind of show the course objectives of Books Behind Bars, because I think that it is a useful illustration of what I mean by like think creatively. Because if you actually, like, Andy knows what Books Behind Bars is, and he knows historically what his students have done. But if you look at the course objectives, you know, they're not written in a way that says a course objective is that you spend X amount of hours in a facility, you know what I mean, working with incarcerated folks. Like, there's some room to think about how to interpret that. So I will tell you, with Andy's course objectives, you know, I think that sort of identify salient issues and challenges in juvenile justice today and formulate your personal response to these issues and challenges, and then communicate and collaborate others in an effective, authentic, empathetic way. those to me, I think are, and Andy, you can jump in if I'm wrong, those to me, I think are what are capturing his in-person community engagement. But you can read those and see there are other ways to have students engage with that. So one of the things that he said even came up this year is that he had a group kind of become slightly more activist and think about how to advocate for, you know, one of the challenges that his class faced was that inmates, the incarcerated people that they were connecting with, a lot of them came out with COVID-19 and there was like a lockdown. So even the technology they couldn't use. And so students advocated for releasing prisoners in the face of a crisis. And like, that's actually really meaningful. And that actually really gets at those objectives. And the other thing is kind of communicating authentically and empathetically. That could possibly happen maybe with a slightly different population. Maybe there's an existing community partner that's thinking about how to support kids with incarcerated parents during a global pandemic, and there would be room to have UVA students be a presence and share stories in that kind of context. You know, so those questions of kind of what exists already, and what exists already that you could plug into, and how do your course objectives actually, what do they actually say? And if you kind of wipe away all the history of what you've done, what is another way that you could approach it that would allow for social distancing, would allow for isolation if we needed to, or would allow for just online learning, are the kind of two starting points. So it's 10:50. I'm going to stop talking and open it up to questions or discussion. And I see, oh yeah, thank you. If you had to leave it earlier than 11 and learn more about assessment in the near future. Yeah, and I mean, and assessing this again is kind of a whole nother, a whole nother ball of wax. But I hope that this was a helpful starting point for you all, and I will stop talking now. So thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
You're so welcome. And I know I didn't leave you all with a prompt, I'm sorry. So really just the prompt is if there's questions or if this makes you think about anything differently, or if there's critiques or pushback too.
I just want to add that I had this amazing light bulb moment while you were talking about this whole notion of, I think it was something that Indu had said too about, but what you said, Rose, was, is there a way that we could capture what has come before us in this class? Because our students have been engaging in these communities for years, and every year I think to myself, gee, you know, it would be really nice if we did a better job of having more continuity from year to year, because it's like every year the students just recreate the same wheel over and over again, and I've always found that frustrating. Well, this might be the opportunity for us to go back and look at what has been done and really create a synthesis about it. So thank you.
When you think about looking back too, it's a different, you know, talking to alums or people who took the class before but aren't, that's a different level of like poking and burdening, you know what I mean, than reaching out to the community partner that I think students are really like set up to do.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think there's a way that we could potentially do that without burdening anyone, previous students or otherwise. So thank you. I just had a light bulb moment. Thank you.
Yeah, I have 3 more minutes. I need to leave in 3 minutes to attend the faculty senate meeting that begins at 11. A very quick question to Rose. And Rose, again, thank you for providing great guidelines for us to think and rethink or reshape what we are thinking and planning right now. You mentioned United Nations volunteer program, and any concrete examples about what students need to do virtually from the perspective of volunteers nationwide, I believe? Any concrete examples? I'm just curious about how they implement things and exactly what volunteers contribute. I have 2 more minutes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So what volunteers contribute to like the national programs, like the UN?
United Nations, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's like the UN. So the UN has a virtual volunteering program. It pairs up people based on their skills with NGOs, and it's typically around grant writing, data analysis, like enterprise analysis, that kind of thing. and like consulting stuff that they could get for free from a volunteer as opposed to having to pay for it. So I know that there's opportunities to have a virtual volunteer assess a website or a communications packet or something and kind of give feedback that they would typically have to pay for. And then I think there's a lot of online presence kind of work around people's websites and messaging. And I also think that there's like photography opportunities, like creating stock photography, you know, that can be super expensive, and that's kind of often the way people donate to NGOs in these big national and international situations that have been set up for years and years.
Any idea, as a follow-up question, any idea about what's the percentage of UVA students that participate in that program?
I don't know. I would guess it was fairly low. I think it's mostly professionals who have already graduated, who have jobs, who sort of use the skills from their jobs to, and I was a UN virtual volunteer. I did grant writing, and I did that while I was a doctoral student here. So, but I was the only one in my cohort that I knew of that was doing it. So I think it's possibly higher for more, for non-undergraduates, but that's also, I could be totally wrong. That's just my best guess.
Thank you.
So I have a question. How do you go about assessing an external community for the need that they might have so that you could offer something? Because I could see how that could be insulting. And also I have such a niche of skills, and I'm particularly in yoga studies and contemplative studies, and I feel like taking meditation as a panacea is wrong, essentially, and also that not everybody wants to stretch and breathe their way to happiness. I don't think that's true either. And I have like this thing that I really like, but I feel it's been misrepresented in our society right now. And so like, I'm afraid to offer it as,
Right.
because I think it will be misleading.
Right. So is this kind of related to when I said like needs assessment isn't the bet, like maybe, so I would say a few things about that. One is determine whether or not the community partners that you would be interested in knowing more about their needs, how burdened they are, right? Like where they're at. And I would say organizations that are focusing on health, safety, welfare of kids and families, like just assume they don't have bandwidth to talk about any needs that are not getting people fed and keeping people safe, especially if you don't know them already. I would say that that saying avoiding needs assessment was probably a flip way of what I really meant to say, which is proceed with caution. Any long-standing relationships or warm relationships that you might have with community organizations that you would want to know more about their needs, I think it's absolutely fine to leverage that and ask about needs. I would suggest in the time of the pandemic to be focused on packaging it in as an easily consumable, answerable thing as possible. Like, let me give you all the details on what people could do and keep it 3 sentences. And would that be something that could be useful to you? Like, you can just let me know in 1 word in a reply to this email or something. Just kind of like that might be the way to do it. And, you know, I also think that finding old needs assessments, especially Charlottesville community organizations that support like under-resourced communities, they have had their needs assessed out the wazoo. You can find it. And so you can find faculty who have studied it, and I would like kind of come at it sideways and try to find the reports or assessments or class projects that other faculty have done. And so you can usually plug into that just from knowing like there's always the usual suspects that probably have the right connection, and starting there and seeing if there was something clear that came up, because I've experienced this, I'm sure everyone has experienced this, like there's a lot of like assessing of needs for classes or for research projects that don't always translate to like the stuff materializing. So there's probably a real opportunity there as well. So I hope that's helpful.
I would feel more comfortable if like we offered a therapeutic intervention coupled with like, hey, we'll help you figure out how to manage your finances too, or something balanced. Do people ever, because it's, yeah, yoga won't fix your finances.
Right.
Cause misery forever.
So it might be that you want to look for people that are already offering things, and so your partner might be the like, yeah, you might be kind of supplementing existing stuff, and I think that that's a different ask too. Like I think that might be a little bit of an easier lift for folks to think about, of like, could we add? And you know, that might be that the volunteer center or like the United Way, like as this stuff hopefully becomes less intense in the summer, that they then have room to think about where that could fit in.
Naomi, I want to add one thing. I wouldn't underestimate people's potential interest in something like yoga. If you're teaching Russian literature, that's another matter, okay? So you're not going to be reaching out to an organization right now trying to convince them that their top priority is Russian literature to teach it to their... But yoga, you might be surprised. So I wouldn't go into these conversations assuming that you're a burden. You may be very pleasantly surprised, because a lot of people are thinking about, and there's been a lot written about the importance of self-care right now, as you know.
Yeah, thank you. That is, I have come at it from that perspective for years, and then just recently had this like, oh, but people think that it will fix everything. And then, so I just wanted to address that as I go forward.
Well, people want fixes right now. I have a friend who every week sends a new, I forgot what her modality is, it's some funky modality. She sends the anxiety toolkit to her mailing list of 200 people. You know, so people want that stuff right now, and you don't want to frame it as a quick fix, but I think that the previous paradigm that you had, the previous concerns, may actually apply even less in this moment when people are searching for peace and calm.
Yeah.
And if I might add, there is already organizations that do a lot of public health, and I think this fits into wellness and self-care. For example, Latino Health Initiative, and I can connect you with them, Naomi, but it would have to be done in Spanish, and we can, you know, talk about that. But they do a lot of events, like for example, they do Zumba events, and it's fun and it's exciting, but it's also a way to like promote healthy habits that have to do with exercise in a culturally sound way. And Latino Health Initiative has a really cool project with health promoters that are women from the community that are liaisons between the UVA system and the community. And they're kind of like ambassadors for healthy activities, but there is a structure that is already created there. So it would be a good place to like share something simple, but the idea is that you don't come with an idea that it requires a lot of other people to work for your idea, but that you can, you know, bring the idea, but also the way of doing it. I don't know. I mean, just a thought that there is already structures that have to do with public health or with health understood in not only in like the physical health, but the mental health. And I would say that mental health is a huge need for communities that have gone through trauma, the trauma of immigration, the trauma of being undocumented and all of that. So, you know, I think
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Give me a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think at the Haven too, they're always looking for programming activities, and especially now when a lot of our homeless population is being housed by Pacham. The women are at the Haven, and then the men are at the Key Recreation Center. And so if you think about their evenings, they, you know, have dinner together in those two facilities, and then like you can't go to bed at 6:30 at night. Like, what do you do between now and whenever bedtime is? And so I think, like Esther's saying, there are lots of places that are looking for these kinds of outlets right now.
Thank you.
And I also think this is illustrating something that's important and that we don't have at a built in at a decentralized place like UVA, which is like a place to connect and hear what everybody else knows. I mean, I think, Catherine, your point that like these, like that don't even know about each, and I've been at West Haven before and had like a random student group walked in and like, what are they doing? Like, there's already a chess club. Why are you trying to come and offer chess club? I mean, I think it's just very, so everyone being able to be plugged in, I think that this is a real service that the CTE is doing, Andy, so thanks.
Yeah, I mean, is there, I'm sorry, I just noticed we're over time, but is there a way that part of this could be like, we all start talking to each other more?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the idea. Yeah, a community. I mean, that ultimately that's what I want to help maintain, is a community of us. And so, what do you have a specific idea of what that would look like? We could meet on a regular basis. This particular learning community was focused around a certain set of issues, but it could continue. We could resume it in the fall, once every 2 weeks, once a month. And each session could be, a different member of our community, like today, could present or co-facilitate with me if they wish, around a certain set of topics, or it could be just a more informal check-in on what we're dealing with, what our challenges are right now, and workshopping different people's challenges as a group. Is that along the lines of what you had in mind, Catherine?
Yeah, I guess even at the most basic level, and maybe I'm sure somebody like Rose who's at a place like Madison House might be seeing the bigger picture better than I am from my vantage point, because I haven't been at a very high level of engagement since I've just mostly been working with individual courses. But just even knowing who knows, like even figuring out who or how to identify how groups across the university are engaging in certain subgroups within our community. Just even being able to identify, like, who knows the answer to that question.
So that's I think Madison House is better positioned, and the provost office are probably best positioned to be able to help with that.
I also think that Vice President McDonald, like the Kevin McDonald shop now, is trying to take a really proactive look at understanding the footprint in the community. I don't want to overspeak. I haven't been in those community meetings, but yeah, I think that Ellen, I would say the answer is there's lots of people trying to get the snapshot. And I know that there are lots of people for whom like an updated snapshot of what's going on every semester so that everyone who's doing this work knows what it is would be like a dream to get there, and people are working towards that. And I don't know how close the university is. Madison House, we're a nonprofit. I'm plugged into this stuff, but we have a pretty good sense, I would say, of the education space because we have so many connections with schools, but less, it's pure volunteering. So if it's a faculty member doing more community-based, like participatory research, that wouldn't necessarily be volunteer shifts. But yeah, I mean, I will say that we've done some research. There was a Jefferson Trust grant that did research on trying to map service projects in Charlottesville. And in terms of service by students, there are not very many places that are getting like super extractive experience of our students. Like they're generally happy, and no place is like totally overwhelmed. It seems like it's the research projects that are the real thing. But there's the Equity Center is also, I think, really key to kind of thinking about that. And they have a community IRB project, and they're really committed to mapping inequity. And so I think that that's where that big picture is coming from right now. So,
and Ellen, the provost office too, right? I mean, you guys really have the big picture on this.
Well, we are trying to build in the structure to capture it from semester to semester, because like we've talked about, UVA is really decentralized, and it is not outside the realm of possibility for a faculty member to design a course and it winds up tapping on the same community organization, and another is that's sort of this like not to overstate it, but this kind of like Wild West scenario that plays out sometimes. One good thing one of many good things that's on the horizon for our office, and it's not me who's working on it, it's actually my colleague Candace Bell, and it's still, COVID has interrupted so much. This has really been pushed out, quite a bit, but working with each school and then perhaps even drilling down into departments as necessary to set goals for engagement for the schools in the way that Kevin's office is setting goals for equity and diversity. And so that would require sort of like, well, how many classes do you want to offer? What classes are on offer so far, and what are their attributes? So the result of one of those more extensive surveys would be a better capture of what's going on already, and presumably through that, a better capture of who these community partners are. So it's really piecemeal right now, admittedly, and semester to semester it is hard to track precisely what classes are going on, but I am hopeful that as the process gets a little more regimented, that we will have the kind of resources that we're asking for right now.
And Catherine, you were talking not just about resources, but also just this community, right? The ability to bounce ideas off of one another, to hear like what we've been doing, kind of thing. Is that also part of what you were?
Yeah, partly so that, like I think Ellen just said, so that random groups aren't just showing up trying to do the same thing with the same neighborhoods, or I think there's, I knew that there was a lot of that going on, but it just having some way for us to capture like how many UVA students are walking into Southwood every semester, and what are we asking of the community, right?
I'm not the best person to talk about it, and perhaps it's already come up, but the Equity Center's Community Research Review Board that's getting off the ground. I mean, as everyone's probably familiar with it already, but that'll be another sort of gate in place to make sure that exactly, we know who's going into West Haven or any of the low-income communities that we work with so frequently.
And I do think that there is a real commitment to trying to make some of the communities who have been overtaxed by researchers feel like they have the ability and power to say no when they want, and then to figure out who to go to at UVA when they want to say no. And I do think the Equity Center is really committed to that kind of vision of giving the tools to community members and partners to like feel like they don't have to just take whatever UVA throws their way or like feel like they can't risk alienating students.
So that's one of the things that Alan Rose and I can in the equity, Bonnie's, a director of the Equity Center, Bonnie Gordon, one of the co-facilitators of this learning community. So that's one of the things that we can work on. And I also like the idea, in the fall, resuming kind of learning community as we all embark on these on our community engaged courses online. Something even informal, once every month, every 2 weeks, where we kind of workshop one another's challenges. We can do that in the fall and or the spring. So that's kind of what I'm hearing from today and from recent conversations, that this group of faculty would find something like that useful, because we have many of our challenges are like those of other faculty, but also many of them are unique. And we got to stick together. Solidarity. All right. Well, we are out of time, but it's a sign of how how productive Rose's session was, that everyone stayed on for an extra 15 minutes. So thank you, Rose. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rose.
Good seeing everyone. We'll see you on May 15th, if you can make it.
Sounds great. Take it easy.
Okay, take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.